The rules of the Underworld are simple. You don't steal from the family. You don't speak unless spoken to. And you never, ever touch Dominic Russo. He was the kind of man who commanded silence just by entering a room. A ghost made of gunpowder and sharp suits. But Harper didn't care about the rules. In the middle of a crowded restaurant, with rival capos watching and a dozen guns drawn, she grabbed his collar, and she kissed him. The reality of organized crime rarely looks like the movies. There are no dramatic orchestral swells when a man gets his kneecaps shattered in a damp warehouse. There is only the wet, heavy sound of bone giving way, followed by a lot of paperwork. Harper knew about the paperwork. She was an auditor by trade, a cynical woman who survived on black coffee, nicotine gum, and an absolute lack of illusions about the world. She didn't work for the mob. She worked for a mid-tier accounting firm in a glass building that scrubbed dirty money through legitimate real estate ventures. She knew it. Her boss knew it. Everyone ignored it until the numbers stopped adding up. $2 million was missing from a shell corporation's offshore account. Harper found the discrepancy on a Tuesday. By Thursday night, her apartment door was kicked off its hinges. She remembered the splintering wood, the smell of cheap cologne, and the cold metal of a gun barrel pressed against her spine. They didn't put a bag over her head. They just told her to walk. A black SUV took her to a meatpacking facility on the edge of the city. The cliché of it would have made her laugh if her heart hadn't been hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Inside, past the hanging carcasses of beef that smelled of iron and frost, was an office. It was stark white, brightly lit, and smelled strongly of bleach. Sitting behind a grey metal desk was Dominic Russo. Dominic didn't look like a thug. He looked like a corporate raider who occasionally killed people with his bare hands. He was in his late 30s, with dark hair neatly parted, a jawline that looked carved from granite, and eyes the color of a winter sky. Those eyes didn't hold anger. They held absolute, terrifying emptiness. "You're the girl with the calculator," he had said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of inflection. "I'm a senior auditor," Harper replied. Her voice shook, much to her disgust. She gripped the fabric of her coat. "And I didn't take your money." "I know," Dominic said. He slid a thick manila folder across the metal desk. "I know exactly who took it. What I need from you, Miss Harper, is the paper trail. I need you to prove it so I can take it to the commission. If I kill him without proof, we have a war. I don't like war. It's bad for logistics. That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of being essentially a prisoner in a luxury penthouse, surrounded by men who carried suppressed pistols under tailored jackets. Harper spent her days tracing digital breadcrumbs, untangling a web of offshore accounts that belonged to a rival family. She learned quickly that Dominic Russo was not a man of explosive rage. He was a man of calculated, chilling patience. He didn't yell. He barely spoke. He watched. He watched her work. He watched his men. He watched the city from the floor-to-ceiling windows of his apartment. Harper found herself watching him back. It was a survival mechanism, she told herself. You keep an eye on the predator in the room. But there was a strange gravity to him. He was a black hole in the center of the room, pulling all the light and oxygen toward him. She noticed the way he meticulously arranged his pens. She noticed the faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow. She noticed that despite the wealth, he ate the same simple meal of grilled chicken and rice every single night. He was a machine, and Harper, running on exhaustion and a simmering anger at her stolen life, was the only human glitch in his system. "You missed a decimal point here," she had snapped at him one evening, pointing at a printed ledger he was reviewing. The 2 bodyguards by the door stiffened. No one corrected Dominic Russo. Dominic looked at the paper. then slowly up at her. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in those dead winter eyes. Amusement? Annoyance? "So I did," he murmured, picking up a pen and correcting it. "Good catch." He didn't thank her. He didn't apologize. But the air in the room shifted. Now, the audit was done. Harper had found the proof. The man stealing the money was Carmine Viti, a boisterous, violent capo from a neighboring faction who had been trying to provoke Dominic for years. With the ledger complete, Harper thought she would be let go. She thought she would pack her sparse belongings, walk out the front door, and disappear into the anonymity of the city. She was wrong. "Get dressed," Dominic told her on a Friday evening. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her college education. "Wear something dark. You're coming with us." "Where?" Harper asked, crossing her arms. She was tired of the fear. It had burned out, leaving only a brittle, cynical edge. "To a ditch?" Dominic paused by the door. "To dinner. I need you to explain the numbers if Carmine tries to deny them." "You're bringing an auditor to a Mafia sit-down?" "I am bringing the truth," Dominic said flatly. "And you are the one who assembled it." Laura was a restaurant that catered to the kind of people who spent thousands of dollars on wine just to impress people they despised. Tonight it was closed to the public. Harper sat at the edge of a long, heavy oak table in the private dining room. The air was thick with the scent of roasted garlic, expensive truffles, and the sharp tang of nervous sweat. 5 men stood behind Dominic. 5 men stood behind Carmine Viti. The silence in the room was heavier than the velvet curtains blocking the windows. Carmine was the polar opposite of Dominic. He was loud, expansive, wearing a flashy silk shirt unbuttoned to reveal a thick gold chain resting on a bed of chest hair. He drank heavily, laughed too loud, and looked at Harper with a greasy, assessing stare that made her skin crawl. "So," Carmine boomed, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "You bring me here, you shut down my favorite place for osso buco, and you bring a skirt to the table. What is this, Dominic? You need a secretary to take notes on how I'm gonna run you out of the South Side." Dominic sat perfectly still. His hands rested flat on the tablecloth. "You've been skimming from the port shipments, Carmine. 2 million over the last 6 months. Routed through a shell company in the Caymans." Carmine laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You're out of your mind. You got proof, or are you just having bad dreams?" Dominic didn't look at Harper, but he gave a slight nod. Harper swallowed hard. Her throat felt like sandpaper. She opened the leather portfolio in front of her. "On October 4th, she began, her voice remarkably steady, despite the tremor in her hands. $300,000 was diverted from the primary shipping account. She laid out the numbers. She spoke for 5 minutes. She didn't use jargon. She used sharp, indisputable facts. As she spoke, she watched Carmine's face. The mocking grin slowly slipped, replaced by a dark, ugly flush. He wasn't a man who liked being cornered, especially not by a woman with a calculator. When she finished, she closed the portfolio. The snap of the leather echoed like a gunshot. Carmine stared at the closed folder. He didn't look at Harper again. He looked at Dominic. The dynamic in the room had shifted, teetering on a razor's edge. Carmine had been caught. In their world, this meant retribution. It meant blood. "Numbers!" Carmine spat. "You can make numbers say whatever you want, Dom. It's a trick." "It's the truth," Dominic said softly. "The commission has a copy. They reviewed it an hour ago. You're done, Carmine. The only question tonight is how you leave this room." Harper felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. She hadn't realized the trap had already been sprung. Dominic hadn't brought her here to convince Carmine. He had brought her here as bait, to keep Carmine occupied, while the ruling body of their underworld signed his death warrant. Carmine realized it too. The color drained from his face, then rushed back in a violent, apoplectic purple. He moved with a speed that belied his bulk. He didn't reach for the heavy silver fork. He didn't flip the table. He reached inside his silk jacket and pulled out a snub-nosed revolver, slamming it down hard onto the white tablecloth. The sound was a bomb going off in a quiet church. Instantly, the air shattered. 10 men drew their weapons. The metallic shuck-shuck of slides being racked filled the room. Harper froze. The barrels of guns were suddenly everywhere, pointed across the table in a deadly gridlock. "Nobody moves!" Carmine roared, spittle flying from his lips. He grabbed the revolver off the table, pointing it directly at Dominic's chest. "You think you can corner me? You think a few spreadsheets are going to put me in the ground? I'll kill you right here. I'll shoot you, and my boys will drop yours before they even twitch." Dominic didn't flinch. He didn't raise his hands. He just looked at the gun, then up at Carmine. "If you pull that trigger, you are dead before my body hits the floor, and your family will be erased by morning." "I don't care about the morning," Carmine screamed, his finger tightening on the trigger. His eyes were wild, the pupils dilated with pure adrenaline and panic. He was a dead man walking, and a dead man with a gun has nothing left to lose. Harper saw it clearly. Carmine was going to shoot. Dominic's men would fire back. The small dining room would turn into a slaughterhouse in less than 3 seconds, and she was sitting right in the crossfire. There was no time to think. There was no time to calculate odds or run a risk assessment. She looked at Dominic. He was perfectly calm, ready to take a bullet to maintain his absolute authority. It was madness. It was rigid, suicidal pride. Screw the rules, Harper thought. Harper moved. She didn't dive under the table. She didn't scream for help. Driven by a blind, terrifying cocktail of panic and survival instinct, she pushed her heavy wooden chair back. It scraped loudly against the marble floor, drawing every eye in the room for a microsecond. She lunged forward, ignoring the guns, ignoring Carmine, ignoring the men standing behind her. She grabbed the lapels of Dominic Russo's bespoke suit. The wool was rough beneath her sweating palms. She pulled him hard, throwing her weight into it, wrenching him out of the direct line of Carmine's shaking gun barrel. But she didn't just pull him. The momentum, the adrenaline, the sheer desperate need to shatter the frozen tableau of impending death drove her further. As Dominic's body shifted, his rigid posture breaking for the first time since she had met him, Harper crashed into him. She smashed her mouth against his. It wasn't a kiss born of romance. It was a collision. It was teeth clashing against teeth, a violent, desperate silencing tactic. He tasted of black coffee and something distinctly metallic, like ozone right before a lightning strike. Her hands were still curled into tight fists in his jacket, holding on as if he were a life raft in a hurricane. For 1 second, the entire universe stopped spinning. The sound of breathing ceased. The tension in the room snapped, not with a gunshot, but with an overwhelming, paralyzing confusion. Dominic's body went utterly rigid beneath her. She felt the heavy muscles of his chest lock up. His hands, which had been resting calmly on the table, instinctively flew up. One hand grabbed her waist in a vice grip. The other hovered inches from the gun, holstered at his side. He didn't push her away. He didn't kiss her back. He was, for the first time in his life, entirely and completely shocked. Harper kept her eyes tightly shut, her heart battering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Please don't shoot. Please don't shoot." She poured every ounce of fake, dramatic passion she could muster into the contact, clinging to the most dangerous man in the city like a desperate lover. "What the hell?" Carmine's voice broke the silence. The screaming rage had vanished, replaced by sheer bewilderment. His gun wavered. Harper broke the kiss. She gasped for air, pulling back just enough to look at Dominic. His winter eyes were wide. The pupil had swallowed the iris. He stared at her, his chest rising and falling against hers. She could feel his heartbeat now. It was fast. For a moment, he looked almost human. Harper didn't look at Carmine. She kept her gaze locked on Dominic. "If you're going to get us killed," she whispered, her voice trembling but fierce, loud enough for the quiet room to hear. "I'm not dying without doing that once." It was a ridiculous line, a theatrical, absurd line ripped straight from a bad soap opera, but in a room full of hypermasculine killers operating on a strict code of respect and violence, the absolute bizarre nature of her action had short-circuited the script. Dominic blinked. Slowly the shock faded from his eyes, replaced by something razor-sharp and terrifyingly fast. His brain, the tactical machine that ran an empire, caught up to what she had just done. She had ruined Carmine's momentum. She had broken the standoff. Dominic's hand moved from her waist. He didn't reach for his gun. He reached up and gently, almost delicately, tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Is that right?" he murmured. His voice was smooth again, but there was a dangerous, live wire energy to it now. He looked past her shoulder at Carmine. Carmine was standing awkwardly, his gun lowered by an inch, completely thrown off balance. The adrenaline spike of a murder-suicide had been interrupted by a bizarre domestic display. He looked foolish. "Put it down, Carmine," Dominic said. The authority in his voice was absolute, layered with a dark, mocking amusement that hadn't been there before. "You're embarrassing yourself in front of my lady." My lady. The word sent a shiver down Harper's spine that had nothing to do with fear. Carmine looked at his own men. They were exchanging uncertain glances. The spell was broken. You can't shoot a rival boss while he's kissing his girl. It wasn't just against the rules. It was pathetic. It stripped the moment of its dignity. Carmine's hand shook. He looked at the gun, then dropped it onto the tablecloth with a heavy thud. He collapsed into his chair, rubbing a hand over his sweating face, a man who realized he had just lost everything and didn't even have the pride of a glorious death. Dominic's men instantly stepped forward, securing the weapon and pulling Carmine roughly to his feet. Harper stepped back from Dominic. Her knees felt like water. She grabbed the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, her chest heaving. Dominic stood up slowly. He adjusted his jacket, smoothing the lapels where her hands had crushed the fabric. He didn't look at Carmine as his men dragged the defeated capo out of the room. He didn't look at his own guards. He looked at Harper. The dining room emptied, leaving only the two of them standing among the half-empty wine glasses and cold plates of food. The silence rushed back in, but it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't the silence before a war. It was the silence after a bomb had gone off. "That," Dominic said quietly, stepping closer to her, "was not in the risk assessment." Harper let out a breathless, half-hysterical laugh. "No, it wasn't." He stopped mere inches from her. The smell of ozone and coffee was back. He looked down at her lips, then up to her eyes. The emptiness in his gaze was entirely gone, replaced by a dark, burning curiosity. "You saved my life," he stated. It was a fact. "I saved my own," Harper shot back, raising her chin defensively. "You were going to let him shoot you. I was going to let him try." Dominic tilted his head. "But you didn't know that. You stepped in front of a loaded gun for a man who took you hostage." "I panicked," she lied. Dominic's lips twitched. It was the closest thing to a smile she had ever seen on him. It was terrifying. "You don't panic, Harper. You audit. You saw an equation that ended in 0, and you changed the variables. He reached out, his knuckles brushing against her cheek. His touch was burning hot. The problem is, now you've changed the rules. For both of us. The ride back to the penthouse was suffocating. The interior of the SUV smelled of expensive leather and gun oil. Harper sat pressed against the far door, her knees tightly together, staring out the tinted window at the passing streetlights of the city. The rain had started to fall, blurring the neon signs into streaks of red and yellow. Dominic sat on the opposite side. He didn't look out the window. He looked at her. Harper could feel the weight of his stare. It was heavy, physical, like a hand resting on the back of her neck. She refused to turn her head. If she looked at him, she would have to acknowledge the absolute insanity of what had just happened in the dining room of Laura. Her lips still hummed with the phantom pressure of his mouth. Her hands still remembered the rigid tension in his shoulders. It made her stomach pitch with a sickening mixture of adrenaline and dread. The glass partition separating them from the driver, a thick-necked man named Vincent, was firmly raised. The silence in the back of the vehicle was total. "You are shaking," Dominic said. His voice was a low hum over the rumble of the tires. "I'm cold," Harper lied. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, digging her fingernails into the fabric of her coat. "The climate control is set to 72 degrees. Then I'm experiencing the delayed physiological response of nearly being executed over a plate of cold ossobuco," she snapped, finally turning to glare at him. The cynical, sharp-tongued auditor was back, a defense mechanism locking firmly into place. "Pardon me if my nervous system hasn't read your manual on stoicism." Dominic didn't flinch at her tone. He merely unbuttoned his suit jacket, the movement slow and deliberate, revealing the dark leather shoulder holster strapped across his chest. "You handled yourself well. Most people would have frozen or screamed. I am not most people. No, you aren't." He leaned back against the leather headrest, his winter eyes studying her face with clinical precision. "But you made a mistake tonight, Harper." She let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "A mistake? I saved your life. Carmine had a loaded point, .38 pointed at your sternum, and your master plan was to sit there and try to outstare a bullet. You're welcome, by the way." Carmine was a dead man the second he drew the weapon. His hand was shaking. He would have missed the first shot. My men would not have missed theirs. Dominic's voice remained utterly devoid of emotion, stating facts like he was reading a weather report. But that is irrelevant now. The mistake was not disrupting the standoff. The mistake was the method you chose. Harper felt a sudden, cold knot tighten in her gut. "It worked. It worked," Dominic agreed. "But actions in my world are not judged solely by immediate results. They are judged by the ripples they create. Do you understand what you did when you grabbed me?" "I created a distraction. You staked a claim." Dominic leaned forward slightly, the shadows of the passing streetlights carving sharp angles across his face. "In a room full of made men, rivals and informants, you threw your arms around a boss. You kissed me. You declared in front of the entire Underworld that we are intimately connected." Harper swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry. "They know it was a lie. They saw the guns. They know I was just—" "They know nothing," Dominic cut in, his tone sharpening. "They deal in perception. And the perception you just cemented is that the cold, untouchable Dominic Russo has a weakness. A girl. A civilian. I'm not your girl. To them you are." He held her gaze, refusing to let her look away. "And in my business, a known weakness is an open target." The SUV pulled into the underground garage of his high-rise building. The tires squealed faintly against the polished concrete, The heavy iron gates rolled shut behind them with a definitive, ringing finality. "So what does that mean?" Harper asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her. The audit was over. She had given him the proof he needed. She had survived the night. But the invisible chain connecting her to this man had just been pulled taut. "It means," Dominic said, reaching for the door handle as the vehicle came to a stop, "that you can't go home. Not tomorrow. Not next week. If you walk out of my building now, Carmine's remaining loyalists, or any other family looking to leverage me, will snatch you off the street before you reach the subway." He stepped out of the car. The cool, damp air of the garage swept into the cabin. He turned back, offering his hand to help her out. It wasn't a polite gesture. It was a command. Harper looked at his hand. The knuckles were lightly scarred, the fingers long and steady. She didn't take it. She slid out of the car on her own, standing toe-to-toe with him in the dim light. "You're keeping me as a prisoner," she said flatly. "I am keeping you alive. Because I'm your leverage now. I'm your PR problem." Dominic's expression tightened imperceptibly. For a fraction of a second, the mask of the ruthless capo slipped, and a tired, dangerously human man looked back at her. "You are my responsibility. You stepped into the line of fire for me. I do not forget debts, Harper. I will protect you." "I don't want your protection," she said, her voice shaking with genuine anger now. "I want my life back. I want my boring, miserable, quiet life back." "That life is gone," Dominic said softly. It wasn't a threat. It was a eulogy. He turned and walked toward the private elevator. Harper stood in the cold garage for a long moment, listening to the echoing footsteps of his guards taking their positions. She looked at the heavy iron gates closing her in. She had audited the ledgers. She had found the missing money. But she had failed to calculate the most important variable of all. You can't touch the devil without getting burned. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Harper adjusted her coat and followed him into the elevator. The doors slid shut, sealing them inside the steel box. As the car shot upward toward the penthouse, Harper stared straight ahead at the polished metal doors. Beside her, Dominic stood perfectly still, a statue carved from violence and restraint. But as the floor numbers ticked higher, Harper noticed something. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Dominic's hand resting by his side. His fingers were twitching, just slightly. The machine was starting to break. Rumors in the underworld move faster than light. They move with the speed of greed and malice. By Tuesday morning, 3 days after the incident at Laura, the story had mutated. Harper was no longer just the brave civilian who broke a standoff. Depending on who was telling the story, she was Dominic Russo's secret wife, a highly trained assassin posing as an accountant, or a rival spy who had seduced him into letting his guard down. Harper learned this from Roman. Roman was Dominic's underboss. He was a man composed entirely of sharp edges, chain-smoking cheap cigarettes, and looking at Harper as if she were a live grenade rolling across his living room floor. "They're calling you the Ledger Lady," Roman grunted, tossing a crumpled newspaper onto the kitchen island where Harper was eating a piece of dry toast. "Carmine's cousin in Brooklyn is already trying to pool money to put a hit out on you. He thinks if he drops Dominic's heart, the whole empire crumbles." Harper paused, her toast halfway to her mouth. She looked at the newspaper. It was a standard daily, open to a gossip column that mentioned a mysterious brunette dining with a prominent logistics CEO. "I'm an auditor, Roman. I don't even like the man," Harper said, taking a defiant bite of her toast. It tasted like ash. "Can't you just issue a press release to the Mafia, a newsletter? Tell them we are strictly platonic." Roman didn't smile. He leaned his heavy hands on the marble counter. In this life, if you show weakness, they smell the blood. Dominic has never shown blood. Never. He doesn't date. He doesn't bring women to sit-downs. Then you show up, put your mouth on him in front of 6 loaded guns, and he lets you live. Roman shook his head, his dark eyes grim. You broke the myth, kid. Now everybody wants to see if the king bleeds. So what's the plan? Harper asked, pushing the plate away. Her cynical armor was holding up, but barely. The walls of the luxury penthouse were starting to feel incredibly close. Do I stay locked in this tower until everyone forgets? No, a voice said from the doorway. Dominic stepped into the kitchen. He was dressed in a navy suit today, a crisp white shirt, perfectly pressed. He looked rested, calm, and terrifyingly in control. He walked to the island, pouring himself a cup of black coffee. Hiding you validates the rumor that you are a vulnerability, Dominic said, taking a slow sip of the scalding liquid. If I lock you away, it tells them I am afraid of losing you. It encourages them to try. So what? Roman challenged, his tone bordering on insubordinate. You put her on a parade float? We attend the Cordoba charity gala tonight, Dominic replied smoothly. He looked at Harper over the rim of his cup. Publicly. Together. Harper choked on her own breath. Excuse me? You want to take me to a gala filled with the exact people who want to put a bullet in my head? Yes. Are you insane? She demanded, sliding off the high stool. You said yourself I have a target on my back, which is why you will be standing next to me, Dominic stated, setting the cup down with a quiet clink. We are going to change the narrative. They think you are a weakness. Tonight, we show them you are an asset. We show them that Dominic Russo does not cower, and the woman on his arm is not a liability. Roman swore softly under his breath and walked out of the kitchen, knowing better than to argue when Dominic used that specific, dead-level tone. Harper stared at the mob boss. I don't have a dress. It has already been delivered to your room, Dominic said. 6 hours later, Harper was staring at a stranger in the floor-to-ceiling mirror of her guest bedroom. The dress was a masterclass in understated lethality. It was a deep, midnight blue silk that clung to her curves like liquid glass, with a neckline that was daring but elegant. The stylists Dominic had sent had pulled her hair back into a sleek, severe twist, highlighting the sharp angles of her cheekbones and the dark, defensive guardedness in her eyes. She looked like money. She looked like power. She looked entirely unlike the woman who spent her weekends eating takeout in sweatpants. A soft knock on the door made her jump. Dominic stood in the doorway. For the first time since she had met him, his expression faltered. He stopped mid-stride, his winter eyes locking onto her. The clinical detachment shattered, replaced by a dark, intense heat that swept over her from head to toe. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Will it do? Harper asked, her voice cracking slightly, betraying her nerves. She hated how much his gaze affected her. Dominic stepped into the room. He closed the door behind him. It is... He paused, his jaw tightening. Adequate. Adequate, she scoffed, rolling her eyes to hide the sudden flutter in her chest. Careful, Dominic. Don't drown me in flattery. He crossed the room until he was standing directly behind her. She could see him in the mirror, a dark shadow looming over her shoulder. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a long, velvet box. He flipped it open. Resting on the white satin was a diamond necklace. The stones were massive, throwing cold, sharp fractures of light around the room. Turn around, he commanded softly. Harper turned. She looked up at him. The smell of his cologne, cedar, ozone, and something uniquely him wrapped around her. Dominic stepped closer, slipping the cold weight of the diamonds around her neck. His fingers brushed against her bare skin at the nape of her neck. His touch was burning hot. Harper gasped quietly, an involuntary sound that made his hands pause. He didn't pull away. His thumbs traced the line of her collarbone. "Listen to me carefully," he murmured, his voice dropping to a rough, gravelly register. "Tonight, you do not flinch. You do not look away when they stare at you. You look at them as if you own the ground they walk on. Do you understand?" Harper looked up into his eyes. The distance between them was practically non-existent. "I'm just an accountant." "Not tonight," Dominic said, his gaze dropping to her lips before snapping back up to her eyes. "Tonight, you are the queen of the board. Act like it." He stepped back, the cold mask slipping firmly back into place. "Vincent is waiting with the car. Let's go." The Cordoba Gala was held in the grand ballroom of a historic downtown hotel. It was ostensibly a fundraiser for children's hospitals, but everyone in the room knew it was a neutral ground for the city's power players to drink champagne and trade veiled threats. When Dominic and Harper entered, the effect was immediate. The low hum of conversation didn't stop, but it shifted. Heads turned, eyes dragged over Harper, assessing, calculating, judging. She felt like a piece of meat thrown into a wolf enclosure. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm, but she remembered Dominic's words. "Do not flinch." She squared her shoulders. She lifted her chin. She channeled every ounce of professional disdain she used when dismantling a fraudulent tax return and projected it outward. Dominic placed his hand firmly on the small of her back. It was a possessive gesture, a clear, undeniable statement to the room. "Mine." They moved through the crowd. Men in expensive tuxedos nodded respectfully to Dominic, their eyes darting to Harper. Dominic introduced her simply as Harper. No titles, no explanations. The lack of context made her seem even more dangerous. Halfway through the evening, near the ice sculpture dripping quietly into a silver basin, a tall, gaunt man with slicked-back hair blocked their path. It was Leo Viti, Carmine's older, arguably more psychotic brother. The air around them instantly dropped 10 degrees. The surrounding guests discreetly backed away, giving them a wide berth. "Dominic," Leo said, his voice a greasy sneer. He didn't offer his hand. He looked past Dominic, his dead reptilian eyes locking onto Harper. "I see you brought the famous ledger lady, the one who likes to play with numbers, and other things." Dominic's hand tightened slightly on Harper's back. "Leo, I suggest you choose your next words with extreme caution." Leo chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Relax, Dom. We're at a charity event. I just wanted to introduce myself to the little civilian who caused my brother so much trouble. Tell me, sweetheart." Leo took a step closer to Harper, his breath smelling of stale cigars and gin. "You think you're safe because you're standing next to him? You think reading a spreadsheet makes you untouchable?" Harper felt the primal urge to run. Her instincts screamed at her to hide behind Dominic, but the cynical, exhausted woman who had been kidnapped, threatened, and dragged into this nightmare had finally had enough. She didn't step back. She stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and the dangerous cartel boss. "I don't think reading a spreadsheet makes me untouchable, Leo," Harper said, her voice crystal clear and ringing with absolute confidence. She looked him dead in the eye. "But having memorized the routing numbers for your Cayman accounts, specifically the ones you haven't declared to the commission regarding the union kickbacks on the East Side docks, makes me very, very dangerous." Leo froze. The smug sneer vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. Harper tilted her head, a cold, mocking smile touching her lips. I audited Carmine's books, but I didn't stop there. I kept digging. $3 million, Leo. If the commission finds out you've been skimming their construction funds, you won't even make it to the parking lot tonight. Complete silence engulfed their small circle. Leo stared at her, his face turning the color of old parchment. He looked at Dominic, expecting a denial, expecting a bluff. Dominic didn't say a word. He just stood there, looking at Harper with an expression of profound, dark awe. Leo swallowed hard. He took a slow step back. You're bluffing. Test me, Harper whispered, her eyes burning with a fierce, reckless light. Give me a reason to publish the PDF. Leo didn't test her. He turned and walked away, practically shoving past a waiter to put distance between himself and the terrifying woman in the blue dress. Harper stood there, her chest heaving, the adrenaline peaking. She had just blackmailed a Mafia boss in the middle of a ballroom. She had weaponized her boring, miserable life. Dominic turned to her. He reached out, his hand sliding up her arm to grip her bare shoulder. He pulled her slightly closer, ignoring the stares of the room. You, Dominic murmured, his breath ghosting over her ear, are a magnificent hazard. Harper looked up at him, the fear entirely gone, replaced by a thrilling, dangerous heat. I told you, I'm an auditor. I balance the scales. The corner of Dominic's mouth lifted into a genuine, dangerous smile. Then let's see what else you can break. The heavy oak doors of the penthouse closed behind them with a definitive, echoing click. Harper immediately kicked off her stilettos, the sound muffled by the plush Persian rug. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the gala rapidly evaporated, leaving a cold, trembling exhaustion in its terrifying wake. She dropped her clutch onto the marble console table and leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. Below her, the city was a sprawling grid of golden streetlights and dark, crawling shadows. She had survived the night, but the crushing weight of reality was slowly setting in. Dominic stood by the leather sofa, slowly loosening his silk tie. He did not look angry. He looked entirely fascinated. He removed his suit jacket, draped it meticulously over the back of a chair, and unbuttoned his collar. The dark leather of his shoulder holster starkly contrasted against his crisp white shirt. You lied, Dominic said, his voice breaking the silence. It was a low, resonant sound that carried across the vast room. He walked toward the wet bar, grabbing a crystal decanter of amber liquid. You lied to Leo Viti in front of 30 made men. Harper turned around, leaning her back against the thick glass pane. The cold seeping through the silk dress grounded her. About what exactly? She asked defensively. Dominic poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a heavy glass. He did not offer her one. About his Cayman accounts. You never had access to Leo's ledgers. You audited Carmine's shell companies. Leo operates through an entirely different network, a deeply isolated network that uses physical cash drops, not digital wire transfers. You had absolutely no proof of his financial discrepancies. Harper crossed her arms tightly, shivering despite the room's warmth. I noticed a repeating pattern in Carmine's quarterly disbursements, Harper explained, her voice steadying. A secondary holding company constantly received fractional percentages of the profits. I traced the registered agent of that holding company. It was Leo's brother-in-law. I didn't possess the routing numbers. I certainly didn't have a downloaded PDF of his accounts. Dominic took a slow sip of his whiskey, his winter eyes fixed intently on her face. You bluffed, he stated flatly. I made a highly educated guess, Harper corrected him, and I presented it with enough aggressive confidence to make him severely doubt his own internal security. Dominic set his glass down on the counter. The sharp clink echoed loudly. He closed the distance between them, his dress shoes tapping rhythmically against the hardwood. He stopped mere inches from her. If he had called your bluff, he would have ordered his men to kill you right there in the ballroom. Harper lifted her chin, refusing to shrink back. If I hadn't bluffed, he would have killed us both eventually. He was probing for weakness. He wanted to see if I was a liability he could easily exploit. I simply proved to him that I wasn't. You proved you are a weapon, Dominic murmured. His hand reached out, his long fingers grazing the heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. His touch was burning hot against her chilled skin. And weapons inevitably draw heavy fire. Harper looked up at him. The clinical emptiness in his gaze had vanished. In its place was a violent, possessive storm. I am not a weapon, Dominic. I am a senior auditor. I just want to go back to my boring desk, drink terrible coffee, and complain about the broken printer. That desk is entirely gone, he replied. His thumb slowly traced the sharp line of her jaw. That life is completely gone. You burned it straight to the ground tonight when you backed a cartel boss into a public corner. Harper swallowed hard, her pulse hammering against his thumb. I did it for you. The honest words slipped out before her cynical mind could successfully stop them. Dominic's hand froze. The air in the penthouse thickened, becoming heavy and electric. He stepped closer, pinning her between his solid body and the cold glass window. The scent of ozone, cedar, and expensive whiskey completely enveloped her senses. Why? Dominic whispered, his voice dropping to a gravelly, dangerous rasp. Why do you constantly step in front of live bullets for a man who kicked your door down and kidnapped you? Harper stared at his mouth. She vividly remembered the metallic, desperate taste of him from the restaurant standoff, the violent collision of their first kiss. Because the underlying math fundamentally changed, she whispered back, her breath mingling with his. Dominic did not ask for a logical explanation. He did not need one. He leaned down and captured her lips with a devastating, ruthless, consuming hunger. This kiss was absolutely nothing like the first. It was not a tactical distraction. It was not a desperate maneuver to survive a deadly standoff. It was a complete and total surrender. Dominic kissed her with the exact same, ruthless, uncompromising efficiency he applied to ruling his criminal empire. He effectively consumed her. His large hands gripped her waist, lifting her slightly off the floor, pressing her firmly against the glass. Harper eagerly tangled her fingers into his neatly parted dark hair, pulling him impossibly closer, anchoring herself desperately to the raging storm that was Dominic Russo. She tasted the sharp bite of whiskey on his tongue. She tasted immense power. Above all, she tasted a desperate, grounding humanity that he viciously hid from the rest of the world. For a man who lived his entire life in absolute, rigid control, his kiss was a chaotic, beautiful unraveling. When he finally pulled away, his chest heaved heavily. He rested his warm forehead against hers, his eyes closed. Leo will not let this go, he said, his voice a raw exhale. He is a dangerously proud man. You publicly humiliated him in front of his peers. I know, Harper breathed, keeping her hands firmly planted on his chest, feeling the frantic, rapid thumping of his heart. He will strike back. Dominic's hands tightened territorially on her hips. And he will specifically aim for you. You are the piece on the board that just threatened his king. Then we strike first, Harper said, her voice completely devoid of fear. She opened her eyes, meeting his fierce gaze. I need a secured, encrypted laptop immediately. and I need Roman to physically bring me every single tax return filed by the Vitti family's legitimate front businesses for the last decade. Dominic studied her face for a long, quiet moment. The corners of his mouth slowly lifted into a terrifying, genuine smile. You are going to audit them to death. I am going to find the loose thread, Harper corrected him, her cynical edge returning, sharp and deadly. And you are going to brutally pull it until their entire empire unravels into dust. The following 48 hours were a blur of excessive caffeine, glowing screens, and towering stacks of heavily redacted financial documents. Harper transformed Dominic's immaculate, minimalist dining room into a chaotic war room. Manila folders blanketed the long mahogany table. Printouts of bank statements, shipping manifests, and union payroll records were taped aggressively to the pristine white walls. Roman had delivered the documents in 3 heavy duffel bags, tossing them onto the floor with a skeptical grunt. 10 years of Vitti family fronts, the underboss had said, lighting a cigarette indoors. Waste management, commercial real estate, and port logistics. Good luck finding a smoking gun in there. Their accountants are extremely expensive. Expensive accountants get intensely lazy, Harper had replied, not even looking up from her screen. They rely on software algorithms to hide the money. Algorithms have predictable, repetitive patterns. I don't. Dominic watched her work. He abruptly cancelled his meetings. He ordered his capos to lock down their respective territories and await further instructions. He essentially paused a multi-million-dollar criminal syndicate just to stand silently in the corner of a dining room, watching a woman in sweatpants aggressively highlight discrepancies in commercial real estate tax filings. Harper was in her element. The lingering fear of the gala was entirely suppressed, replaced by the clinical, obsessive thrill of the hunt. She tracked the phantom money. She followed the subtle, fractional dips in revenue that matched perfectly with sudden spikes in offshore holding accounts. She traced the ghost employees on the union payrolls back to non-existent addresses in shell neighborhoods. By hour 40, her eyes burned with immense fatigue, and her fingers cramped painfully from typing. But she had it. "Gotcha," Harper whispered, her voice cracking slightly from disuse. Dominic stepped out of the shadows immediately. "Show me." Harper tapped her fingernail against a highlighted column on her screen. Leo Vitti isn't just skimming from the Commission's construction funds. He's actively defrauding the federal government through a highly complex shell game involving municipal waste contracts. Look at this holding company here. Vanguard Logistics. They received $12 million in municipal grants for Green Initiative waste processing. Dominic leaned over her shoulder, his proximity sending a familiar, involuntary shiver down her spine. Vanguard is a known Vitti front. They process garbage from the east side. They don't process anything, Harper corrected, pulling up a secondary spreadsheet. They are declaring massive operational losses on their federal taxes while simultaneously moving the grant money through these 3 dummy corporations. Corporations that, incidentally, are entirely registered under the maiden name of Leo's wife. Dominic's eyes narrowed as he processed the data. The implications were catastrophic. If you take this to the Commission, Harper continued, turning her chair to face him, they will execute Leo for stealing from the collective pot. But if you anonymously send this specific routing data to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, the federal government seizes all of Vanguard's assets. Dominic finished, his voice dropping into a lethal, quiet register. They freeze Leo's legitimate bank accounts. They raid his homes. The Commission won't even have to lift a finger. The feds will effectively dismantle his entire infrastructure by Friday morning. Exactly. Harper leaned back, crossing her arms. I audited him to death. A heavy, profound silence fell over the room. Dominic stared at the glowing spreadsheet, a master tactician realizing he had just been handed the ultimate weapon. He looked down at Harper. Her hair was messy, her eyes were sporting dark bags, and she was wearing one of his oversized grey t-shirts. She looked absolutely magnificent. "You deeply understand what happens once I hit send?" Dominic asked. "Leo will quickly realize who did this. He won't wait for the federal indictment. He will come for blood immediately." "Let him come," Harper said, her voice remarkably steady. The cynical auditor had evolved into something far more dangerous. She was a woman who had finally realized her own terrifying worth. "We currently have the high ground." Dominic reached past her, his hand resting on the mouse. He didn't hesitate. He clicked the button, encrypting the compiled dossier and sending it through an untraceable server directly to a federal tip line. The digital execution was complete. "Roman," Dominic called out, his voice echoing loudly through the quiet penthouse. The underboss appeared in the doorway instantly, a fresh cigarette dangling from his lips. "Yeah, boss. Arm everyone," Dominic commanded, his winter eyes locking onto the city skyline outside the window. The storm was finally here. "Lock down the elevators. Secure the perimeter. Leo Viti is going to make a desperate move before the sun comes up." Roman didn't ask questions. He simply nodded, dropping his cigarette into a glass of water, and disappeared down the hall. The metallic sounds of heavy weapons being loaded began to echo through the luxury apartment. Dominic turned back to Harper. He reached down, grasping her hand and pulling her up from the chair. "You need to move to the safe room immediately." "No," Harper refused, planting her feet firmly. "I'm staying with you." "Harper, this isn't a boardroom negotiation. When Leo realizes his accounts are frozen, he will send a heavily armed strike team. This building will quickly turn into a war zone." Dominic's grip tightened, his protective instincts violently flaring to life. "I absolutely cannot protect you if you are directly in the line of fire. I didn't step into the line of fire at the restaurant, just to hide in a closet now," she shot back, her dark eyes flashing with stubborn defiance. "I started this audit. I'm finishing it." Before Dominic could loudly argue, a deafening, concussive explosion violently rocked the entire building. The heavy oak doors of the penthouse didn't just open, they completely shattered inward. Splinters of wood and chunks of plaster violently erupted into the foyer, followed immediately by the blinding flash of a stun grenade. The massive shockwave threw Harper backward, her ears ringing with a high-pitched, agonizing whine. Leo Viti hadn't waited for the sun to come up. He hadn't waited for the federal raid. He had completely bypassed the digital war and brought the violence directly to their front door. Dominic moved with terrifying speed. He caught Harper before she hit the floor, violently tackling her behind the heavy, solid oak of the overturned dining table, just as a relentless hail of automatic gunfire shredded the floor-to-ceiling windows. Glass rained down around them like deadly diamonds. The endgame had officially begun. The smell of pulverized drywall and burning cordite instantly erased the scent of expensive cologne. Harper pressed her hands violently against her ears. The noise was not like the movies. It was a physical, oppressive pressure. A concussive series of overlapping thunderclaps that rattled the fillings in her teeth and compressed her lungs. Dominic did not cower. He crouched beside her, his body a solid, immovable shield of muscle and bone. His hand, previously gentle against her cheek, was now wrapped tightly around the grip of a matte black Sig Sauer. He moved with a terrifying, practiced economy of motion. He didn't waste bullets on blind fire. He waited, a calculating predator, anticipating the exact microsecond to strike. "Stay entirely flat," he ordered, his voice a harsh, commanding rasp, barely cutting through the high-pitched ringing in her ears. "Do not look up." Heavy footsteps crunched aggressively over the broken glass. The city lights from the financial district bled through the shattered floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the ruined floor. 3 of Leo's men breached the dining room, tactical rifles raised, scanning the dust-filled air for targets. Dominic pivoted smoothly around the edge of the overturned oak table. He fired 3 rapid times. The sharp, deafening cracks of his pistol cut cleanly through the chaos. 2 men dropped instantly, their bodies hitting the hardwood floor with sickening, heavy thuds. Empty brass casings rained down on the rug, pinging musically against the chaos. The 3rd gunman scrambled backward, diving behind the thick marble of the kitchen island. He returned a wild, panicked burst of automatic fire that shredded the leather sofa behind them, sending white stuffing snowing down into the blood and dust. Across the sprawling penthouse, Roman and Vincent were fiercely holding the main hallway. The mechanical roar of their return fire was absolute, deafening violence. It was a brutal, contained war zone inside $30 million of prime real estate. The quiet, predictable life Harper had known was utterly annihilated in the crossfire. Harper kept her eyes wide open. Blind panic was a luxury she simply couldn't afford. She saw the 3rd gunman crawling on his stomach around the far edge of the marble island, pulling a fresh magazine from his tactical vest. He was calculating the geometry of the room. He had a clear, unobstructed angle on Dominic's exposed flank. Dominic was intensely focused on a new, immediate threat entering through the shattered double doors. He didn't see the man slowly flanking him by the island. Harper didn't pause to analyze the risk. She reached out, her hand scrambling desperately over the debris on the floor, and her trembling fingers closed firmly around the heavy crystal decanter Dominic had poured from earlier. It was solid, dense lead crystal, heavy as a brick. She hurled it blindly with every ounce of frantic, adrenaline-fueled strength she possessed. The decanter shattered violently against the marble countertop mere inches from the flanking gunman's face. The heavy splash of amber whiskey and the razor-sharp spray of flying glass made him flinch violently. His finger jerked on the trigger, sending his shot wide and burying it harmlessly into the vaulted ceiling. The distraction lasted less than half a second. But in their brutal world, a half second was an eternity. It was enough. Dominic snapped his wrist toward the sudden movement and fired twice. The gunman slumped forward immediately, sliding limply against the white kitchen cabinets, leaving a thick smear of crimson in his wake. Suddenly, the heavy barrage from the hallway ceased entirely. A chilling, heavy silence fell over the ruined apartment, broken only by the groan of settling debris and the distant mechanical wail of city sirens rushing toward the financial district. Then a slow, dragging footstep echoed ominously from the foyer. Leo Vitti stepped over the shattered threshold. He looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant, untouchable cartel boss from the charity gala. His incredibly expensive suit was covered in thick white plaster dust and dark crimson stains. His left arm hung uselessly by his side, dripping thick blood onto the Persian rug. In his right hand, he held a heavy, silver revolver. He was a dying, desperate animal, backed firmly into a corner, looking for someone important to drag to hell with him. "You!" Leo wheezed, coughing up a spatter of blood. His crazed, unfocused eyes locked onto Harper, completely ignoring the armed Mafia boss standing right beside her. "You ruined my entire family, a damn calculator, a nobody." He raised the trembling revolver, his finger tightening. Dominic did not offer a final, dramatic quip. He did not ask for a surrender. He simply stood up tall from behind the barricade, his face an emotionless mask of pure execution, and leveled his weapon. "The math," Dominic said coldly, "is final." He pulled the trigger. One precise shot. Center mass. Leo's eyes rolled back into his skull. His body folded in on itself like a broken marionette before collapsing in a heap of ruined fabric and shattered ambitions. The heavy silver revolver clattered harmlessly across the wooden floor. The immediate aftermath of visceral violence is never glamorous or cinematic. It is just dirty, exhausting, and overwhelmingly quiet. Harper slowly pushed herself up from the floor, her legs trembling so violently she had to grip the edge of the overturned table to remain upright. The knee of her custom silk dress was violently torn, and a thin line of blood trickled down her shin from a minor graze of flying glass. Dominic immediately lowered his weapon, his thumb efficiently engaging the safety. He turned to her. The ruthless, mechanical killer vanished the absolute second his eyes met hers. He closed the distance in 2 long strides, dropping his gun carelessly onto the ruined table and gripping her shoulders. His large, warm hands roamed frantically over her bare arms, her neck, her back, obsessively checking for bullet holes or lethal injuries. "I'm okay," she choked out, coughing harshly on the thick, metallic dust lingering heavily in the air. "I'm fine, Dominic. It's just a scratch." He stopped his frantic search. His chest heaved heavily under his ruined white shirt. He pulled her flush against him, crushing her to his chest. He buried his face deep in her dusty hair, his breathing exceptionally harsh and ragged. For a man who lived his entire adult life completely detached from human consequence, he was physically shaking. "You threw a whiskey decanter at a trained man holding an automatic rifle," he murmured into her hair. It was a mixture of absolute disbelief, lingering terror, and a dark, genuine amusement bleeding into his rough voice. "He had a clear angle on your flank," Harper replied softly, wrapping her arms tightly around his waist, grounding herself completely in the solid, unyielding heat of his body. "I told you exactly what I'd do." I balanced the scales. Roman limped into the ruined dining room, heavily wiping a dark streak of soot and blood from his forehead. He callously kicked Leo's discarded weapon away with his heavy boot, surveying the absolute carnage of the penthouse. He looked at Dominic holding Harper, and just shook his head, a faint, cynical smirk cutting through the exhaustion. "Feds are hitting Vanguard Logistics right now," Roman reported, his voice raspy. "I just got a scanner alert from our inside guy. The sirens you hear outside are local PD and SWAT. We have exactly 4 minutes before they aggressively breach the main lobby." Dominic pulled back slightly, looking deeply down at Harper. The sirens were growing steadily louder, a mechanical wail echoing sharply off the glass canyons of the city. The violent storm was officially over, but the monumental cleanup was just beginning. "We use the freight service elevator," Dominic ordered, not breaking his intense eye contact with her for a single second. "We head straight to the harbor. I have a private boat waiting, fully fueled. We vanish for a few months down to the Caribbean, while Roman's lawyers and the IRS completely tear the remaining VT Empire apart." He finally released her waist, taking a very slow half-step back. He looked at her, truly looked at her. She wasn't the terrified, cynical captive sitting in the freezing meat-packing plant anymore. She was bruised, completely covered in plaster dust, and standing resolutely amidst a pile of dead cartel soldiers. Yet, she looked entirely unbroken. She looked like she belonged there, ruling the ashes. "You can easily walk away right now," Dominic said quietly. The spoken words sounded like they cost him immense physical pain to say. "When we reach the ground floor garage, Vincent can safely take you to a federal FBI field office. With the ledgers and data you provided tonight, they will immediately give you full immunity and witness protection. A brand new name, a quiet life, away from me and all this blood." Harper looked around the violently ruined penthouse. She looked at the blood staining the Persian rug, the shattered glass reflecting the city lights, the sheer, unadulterated chaos of his criminal world. Then, she looked back at the man who had quite literally burned his own empire to the ground and faced down a cartel just to keep her safe. Witness protection genuinely offered a quiet, peaceful life. A boring desk, a safe, predictable daily equation that always safely equaled 0. She absolutely hated 0. Harper reached out, her fingers catching the ruined lapels of his dusty shirt. She firmly pulled him down, pressing a soft, deliberate, and fiercely possessive kiss to the corner of his mouth. It wasn't desperate like the restaurant. It was a conscious choice. It was a promise. "I'm a senior auditor, Dominic," she whispered, her cynical, brilliant smile returning, sharp and bright through the dirt and shadows. "And your books are a complete, unmitigated mess. You definitely need me to stick around." Dominic's cold winter eyes warmed instantly, the terrifying darkness fully retreating. He picked up his gun from the table, sliding it smoothly back into his leather shoulder holster, and firmly offered her his hand. "Then let's go balance the books," he said. Harper took his hand without hesitation. It was warm, calloused, and utterly steadfast. They turned their backs on the total ruin of the old underworld and confidently walked out into the echoing hallway together, leaving the messy paperwork for someone else to finally clean up. "Thank you for experiencing this dark, gripping journey into the heart of the underworld. If Harper and Dominic's fierce, calculating romance kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button to let us know. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow Mafia romance fans who truly crave a story where the heroine fights back with pure intelligence. Subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our thrilling original stories. Leave a comment below telling us your favorite moment. Your support fuels our storytelling. See you next time.